G'day you mob, how's it going? Welcome to this episode of Aussie English. I'm your host Pete. I hope you're having a great week, and I thought today we could do something a little different again. So there's been a few episodes where I've jumped onto Reddit and I've seen really interesting questions that people are asking of Australians, right? Can you guys as Australians answer this? You know, what do you reckon about X, Y, Z? All that sort of jazz. And this one came up and I just had to jump on it. Like I was literally sitting on the couch behind me a minute ago, scrolling Reddit after doing a few podcast recordings, you know, taking a bit of a break, having a smoko, minus the smoke. And I saw this come up, so I thought we could do it. Okay, so here we go. What stereotypes about Australia or Australian people bothers you the most? Okay, so I have only just sort of half read the first comment, and I can already see that there are shitloads of comments on this post, so I think it is going to make for an interesting discussion with you guys. All right, so the first one comes from OK Anteater. Cool name. Not that I care that much, but the whole everything wants to kill you is wild from a country with more mass shootings than days... is wild from a country with more mass shootings than days in the year. So he's referring to America and how Americans are always talking about how dangerous everything is in Australia and it all wants to kill you. And yet they are renowned for having loads and loads of guns, gun crime, shootings, all that sort of stuff. I'll continue. Like the last recorded death by a spider bite in Australia was 1979. And while snake-related deaths still happen, it's like 1 to 2 a year. And it's usually because the victim didn't do anything about it. It's 2024. We have anti-venoms. So actually, I think there is a more recent death from spiders. I think it was a handful of years ago, and it was a young guy in Queensland who got bitten by a redback from memory. You guys can Google, search it, and check it. But yeah, so that's a good point. I mean, it is one of those weird things. Like I remember it was probably on one of those episodes of Joe Rogan where he's interviewing some naturalist or whatever. It's some Yahoo kind of guy that goes into nature and makes videos for National Geographic or whatever about capturing dangerous animals, you know, Steve Irwin type dude. I remember this from years back, and Joe Rogan, talking about just like, oh God, Australia's fucked, you know, there's so many things there that want to kill you, and you're just like, have you been to Australia, man? Like, we've got stuff everywhere, but it's not like America doesn't have, you know, crocodile type animals, right? They've got crocodiles and alligators. They got sharks. They got venomous snakes like, what are they called again? The ones that rattlesnakes, right? They got those all over the place. They got freaking bears. They got cougars. You guys got large mammals, wolves. You know, it's such a weird thing that Australia has this reputation. So, yeah, and it is. I think I'd rather die from a crocodile attack where they grab onto you and just take you under the water and you drown, than by a bear or a moose, you know, or a cougar. Good God. Anyway, let's keep going. All right. I might just forego the usernames because there's some weird ones that I can't pronounce. Kiwis thinking that Australia is the land of milk and honey. Yeah, that's an interesting one. So the land of milk and honey, I guess, is a place that is incredibly wealthy, abundant. You know, there's lots there. And New Zealand, my dad always says that New Zealand's the best place in the world, really, if you want to talk about, you know, the natural environment, quality of life, all that sort of stuff. Though, interestingly, I was having a chat to Ken, one of the guys that works at the local kindergarten, takes care of my kids. He's probably taking care of them right now. And Ken, I believe, is from Tonga, which is an island, I think, between Papua New Guinea and Australia. I haven't checked it on a map, but I think it's up north. Or it might be to the northeast. Anyway, he also went to New Zealand and lived there for a long time and was working there, but moved to Australia recently, and he was telling me that New Zealand is just insane in terms of the cost of living, prices of housing, the price of food, milk, fuel, all that sort of stuff. He's like, I actually moved to Australia here in order to have a better life that I could afford, which is saying something considering Australia's cost of living is absolutely out of control at the moment. So yeah, I guess it is one of those things. It goes both ways, right? Australia isn't necessarily the land of milk and honey at all, but neither is New Zealand, even though a lot of people would tell you it is, you know. And it's probably one of those things too where the grass is always greener. Like I've always sort of daydreamt about moving to New Zealand or another country like France or something. But I'm sure no matter where you go in the world, there's always going to be problems and issues and, looking over the fence and being like, oh, my neighbors have it better. All right, let's keep going. I don't know where this stupid shoey business came from, but it needs to stop. So the thing he's talking about with shoey business, he means those shoeys, which is this kind of like bogan culture in Australia about pouring your beer into your shoe and then drinking it, right? It's kind of this blokey, gross ritual. I've seen a few sporting stars do it when they win things. You might see people do it who are Formula One racers or who are bike riders in the Tour de France or whatever, right? But yeah, it is. It's one of these things where you're just like, where did this come from, and why is this uniquely Australian? Because it just seems like a kind of silly thing to do, right? But at the same time, Australia's culture is is pretty what would you say? It's wide but not very deep, right? We've got a lot of weird shit that we do and that we consider Australian, but it's not necessarily centuries old cultural behavior, right? Like the mullet. Okay. Another one saying everything can kill you and upside down jokes. So yeah, obviously we just covered the everything can kill you thing. The upside down joke is often made by, I guess it's made by like Americans, but also Australians when they're sort of trying to accentuate the fact that we're different. We're on the other side of the planet and underneath the equator, right, in the southern hemisphere. And so there's quite often those sorts of tropes that you'll see on ads or in movies and all that sort of thing. And the whole, you're from down under, right? Down under the equator is where that comes from. But I remember there was an ad a while back. I don't know if it was for beer or what, but there was something where they were saying, Australia is on top, and they showed an image of the globe kind of like changing orientation so that the southern hemisphere was in the north, and rotating the country and being like, Australia was up. Yeah, what would you say? Would be up the right way, and everyone else is down. Down under. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. All right, here's one. That we're all blonde, tan surfers. Maybe that was true decades ago, but these days most people are migrants, and many can't even swim at all, let alone surf. And I can't tell you the last time I saw someone with blonde hair. It's annoying because whenever I go overseas, and let's say I need to wait for a host or something, they can never find me because they were looking for a surfer chick. Despite even having a photo of me, which clearly displays that I'm not blonde nor a surfer. So that is true. I feel like that's a trope that came from probably the 60s, 70s, maybe the 80s, when, yeah, everyone thought of Australians as these, Caucasian, blonde people that lived on the beach. And yeah, it's not true at all. And it's becoming less and less true the more we, move into the future, right? Yeah, I think it's probably something like 50% of Australians now are born overseas or have parents who are born overseas. So, yeah. Anyway, what's the follow-up comment here? My husband has dark hair and dark eyes and slightly olive skin. No, he's not a migrant. He could not be much more Australian, as he is a direct descendant of one of the first settlers and related to the first white baby ever born in southeast Victoria. And he doesn't have a surfer's body either. On the other hand, I'm a migrant, and when I was young, I was blonde and fit. I'm European, but as soon as I open my mouth, people are surprised to hear a rather thick accent. Then they ask my dear husband, with perfect native English, where he's from. Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things. I had friends who are a little sensitive when it comes to that, right? And I've got friends and their partners who are migrants, and they don't like being asked where they're from. But it is one of those things you need to get used to in Australia, because we're curious and we're interested, and it's not done to otherize, if we can turn that into a verb. It's not done to make someone feel less than someone else, oh, you're not Australian originally. No one gives a shit about that, really, and if they do, yeah, they're not worth your time. But generally, people are just curious and they're interested in people from overseas. And this might be one of those things that perhaps it's different in your home countries or in places like America. Again, I don't know, but I imagine there may be differences in how much people care about where you're from, and it may matter a lot more, right? Like, ooh, you're a foreigner. Ooh, you're not one of us, right? You're from over there. Ooh. Or maybe the complete opposite of like, oh my God, I absolutely love foreigners. Like, my wife is Brazilian. You guys all know this. And it is so interesting seeing the cultural differences between Australians and Brazilians when it comes to, say, foreigners speaking their native language, right? So what do I mean by this? If I speak Portuguese to someone who's from Brazil, they lose their mind, and it's not everyone, but quite often they'll just be like, oh my God, you speak Portuguese. That's amazing. That's incredible. It's like I'm a genius, right? Like, you blow their mind if you are able to speak their native language fluently. Whereas for me, if I encounter migrants who've come to Australia and speak to me in English, it's kind of like, yep. Like, migrants speak English. It would almost seem nasty if I was to be like, oh my God, you speak English. That's amazing. I can't believe you speak. Like, it would almost seem like I was being patronizing or rude, right? But it's just one of these things where I think Brazilians aren't used to loads of foreigners migrating to their country the same way they do to Australia, showing an interest in their culture, learning their music, learning, all that sort of stuff. And so when they do, they seem to lose their minds a little bit. It's a really interesting cultural difference. I'm always mind blown. Like, my wife and I have these things where she'll be like, you got to check this guy's Portuguese out. And I'm like, when have I ever said to you, check out this chick's English, or check out this guy's English? He's also from overseas. Because it would be like, why would that matter? Like, of course he's good at it. Everyone's good at English, right? Everyone learns English at school or whatever. So anyway, I'm rabbiting on. All right, let's keep going. Okay, here's another one. That Australians are blunt and like to speak their mind honestly. Whilst it may be true in the country, in the big cities, Australians are so easily offended with the most insane levels of bureaucracy. Business is all about nepotism, and even a suggestion of disagreement will offend. Yeah, see, I don't have a lot of experience with that. Obviously, I haven't worked in the business sort of community at all, but there is definitely a lot of nepotism that happens in Australia, and you will see this in politics, right? A lot of people who are politicians and, who would be bankers, who would be high up in the business community, will almost certainly be from families where that's always sort of been the case, where they are rich, they've sent their kids to private schools with the intention of having them, in air quotes, highly educated, so that they can then sort of further the family business or name, that sort of thing. So there is definitely that kind of attitude at the top, especially, with loads of politicians. Like, you'll probably hear a lot of the time at the moment, our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, leaning on the fact that he was from public housing, right? So he's emphasizing the fact that he comes from poverty. I think he was raised in a single parent household, right? I think it was him and his mum, and they had, nothing back in the day. Whereas someone like Peter Dutton is worth $300 million. The opposition leader is worth something like $300 million through business and houses and all that sort of stuff. And I'm pretty sure, it would be family wealth. I doubt that he's made that himself. And it's the same. You look at all of them, Malcolm Turnbull, who was the other one? Scott Morrison. They're all private school kids, rich families. The Liberals are the worst for it, absolute worst for it. So there's truth in that. Here's another one for you guys. Shrimp on the barbie. Chuck another shrimp on the barbie. Prawns maybe, but snags are the most common thing to go on a barbecue. 100% true. I remember seeing this, this is the whole Paul Hogan ad for Australia. It was like a Tourism Australia ad from the 80s where it's aimed at Americans after his movie Crocodile Dundee came out, right? So I think Crocodile Dundee, whether or not it was explicitly made in order to advertise Australia as an exotic place that Americans should visit or not, I don't know if the government sort of funded the film, but it definitely kind of took that position in the cultural kind of zeitgeist in America and Australia. And he became the face of kind of like tourism for a while in the 80s. And he's on these ads. You can look him up. Just type in like Crocodile Dundee ad or Paul Hogan ad. And you'll see him and a bunch of other Aussies being like, the beer's cold, the beaches are beautiful, chuck another shrimp on the barbie and come out here to Australia and see the place, overdoing the accent. The thing that they had to do, though, was use the word shrimp when he said chuck another shrimp on the barbie, because Americans use the word shrimp, whereas for Australians we say prawn, right? A prawn is a large, well, they're the same thing, but we use the word prawn. A prawn is a large shrimp. A shrimp would be the kind of crustacean thing that you have in your fish tank. You know, the size of half your little finger or something. So you're not going to eat it, right? It'd be pretty crunchy. So, yeah, it is one of these things. And I think in Dumb and Dumber, there's a scene, right, where Jim Carrey's in the limo driving around and he leans out of the limousine and this lady, this beautiful woman is standing there and he's like, hey, I don't know what he says, but he says like, where are you from? And she's like, oh, I'm Austrian, right? Austrian, all right, as in Europe, right? Austria, they speak German. And he's like, oh, Australian, chuck another shrimp on the barbie. And yeah, so it's the bane of our existence. We get so sick of hearing that phrase and that idea of like, especially from Americans, it's an eye roller, right? If you go to America and they're like, oh, you're Australian, chuck another shrimp on the barbie, mate. You'll just be like, oh, fuck yourself. Like, seriously, man. Like, come on. Anyway. All right, it's getting off the rails. We'll see if we can do a few more, guys. Again, let me know if you're enjoying these sorts of episodes. I feel like it allows me to talk about more interesting topics that we might otherwise not talk about, and I get to sort of mention the experiences or comments from other Australians as well, so it's not just me and my 2 cents. Okay. People make it seem like we're speaking a whole other dialect. We're just using bastardized English, British English, and with less effort. Yeah, so that's one of those things that's interesting. Again, my experience with this. So I had this might be an interesting story for you guys. So when I was probably 18 or 19, I had bought a VN Commodore wagon, right? This old wagon. It was about as old as me, I think, from 1987. So yeah, there's not many of them around anymore. They've all rusted out and probably been hooned into oblivion by young men. I bought one of these and I was driving around, as I would as a kid, and there was a guy who needed a lift from my local town, Barwon Heads, into Geelong. And he seemed like a kind of interesting, crusty-looking character, probably 40-something years old, carrying a guitar and a surfboard. So I was like, he's probably not going to hurt me. I'll give him a lift. Anyway, he turned out to be the most interesting dude, right? Just had a bit of a hippie, I think he had like no thongs on, no shoes. He, was anti-government type and just had all these kind of theories and he was just interesting to talk to. A really cool guy. His name was Steve. And he reminded me a lot of Bernard Fanning from Powderfinger. So, yeah, anyway, I struck up a convo with him and he had the broadest Australian accent. That whole, how's it going, mate? Really nasal kind of pronunciation on everything that he said. And I got to know him. So I dropped him off in Geelong, gave him my number, and we ended up catching up, quite a few times in the future, probably first and second year university, because he was just always around. And I would just see him in places. It was so random. I remember, so that was taking him from Barwon Heads to Geelong. He lived in Barwon Heads. He was renting a house there. Wouldn't be able to do that anymore, any of us. Barwon Heads is hell expensive. But yeah, so he was doing that at the time. And then I remember one day, so I made friends with this American girl. It would have been first year uni. I was living in, where is it again? Public Square, what is it called? Uni Square, something like that, outside of Melbourne University. There's this big building that has student sort of accommodation. I was living there with a friend. I made friends with this American chick. We're walking through the city one night after getting coffee or whatever, and I see Steve just busking on the side of the road playing his guitar. And I was just like, fuck, Steve, what are you doing here? Like, I just, aren't you living in Barwon Heads? What the hell? And he's like, yeah, man, just came up, doing some basking, chatting away. And I introduced the girl. I'm like, here's so-and-so. We're just going out to get some blah, 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 food, whatever. And he's chatting away and she just turns to me and she's like, I can't understand anything he says. And I remember I was like, oh, look, Steve, we're going to head off. I'll chat to you later, mate. Have a good one. So we go off and she's like, was that seriously English? Seriously. And it would have been like that. Was that seriously English? Was he speaking English? And I remember just being flabbergasted because I'm like, yeah, it was English. Like, he was speaking Australian English just like I do. And she's like, it was not just like you. And so it was just a really eye-opening kind of moment where I realized She had obviously moved to Australia to study at university and was used to speaking with other people also at Melbourne University who would have probably learnt American or British English if they were migrants or people from overseas, or would have that general Australian accent, like myself. And she hadn't encountered broad Australian English. And it is one of those really interesting cultural differences between America and Australia, and probably most other countries in the world, really. I always think of Australia as kind of like we're a house with loads of windows and we're all looking out the window, right? We're all looking at other countries. We're consuming their films, their TV shows, their music, their books, all this sort of media, podcasts, you name it, right? I probably know more about American politics than I do about Australian politics. And it's not very much, but still, right? The point is, I consume so much content that talks about American politics that I know way more about it. Whereas America's the opposite. They're inside a house, if the country was a house and there's no windows, right? Like maybe there's a few tiny little windows, but by and large, I think Americans could care less, right? They do not give a shit about Australian film, French film, Argentinian film, whatever. They have no interest. They're interested in American stuff. So this tends to be one of those really interesting things where, like, I grew up watching American TV shows, British TV shows, films from places like France, Brazil, whatever it was, right? I would just consume content that was interesting. But by and large, and it's not every single American, obviously, but this is definitely one of those things where when I was chatting to this girl, I remember realizing she just doesn't have much exposure to Australian English. She hasn't spent her young years watching TV shows, listening to music with the Australian accent, and therefore training her listening comprehension to be able to understand it easily, right? Whereas, like, I can watch movies where, maybe it's African Americans and their culture, and they speak with African American English, and it is very, very different from Australian English, but I can understand it perfectly well because I've watched and consumed so much, content that has exposed me to it, and I've gotten used to it. So that's one of those cultural things that differs, and it may be the same for you guys in your countries with other countries, not necessarily America or Australia. I think I remember hearing that is it Norwegians can understand Swedes really easily, but Swedes can't understand Norwegians very easily. And a big reason for this is that Norwegians consume loads of Swedish music, TV, film, all that sort of stuff. So I don't know. I find it that sort of thing endlessly fascinating, right? Where there's sort of directionality in how easily someone can understand someone else, culturally or their dialect or whatever. All right, let's do a couple more. We've been ranting for a little bit though. Dumb, drunk, and racist. Okay, in quotes. I don't want to get into an argument about how true or not it is, but it bothers me that some people view us this way. This does tend to be something, right? That Australians, you will hear from certain people that Australians are stupid. They drink too much, they're and this may be Aussies saying that we're amazing drinkers. We're not actually. Estonia win from what I understand. I think it's Estonia and Russia that win on the drinking front. But then also that we're massively racist. And it's one of those things that sort of irritates me too. Racism exists everywhere. Australia has racism, but at the end of the day, if Australia was as racist as some of the people that I've interacted with in the past believe Australia is, you're kind of like, why would we have so many migrant people coming to the country, right? Wouldn't people vote with their feet? If it was Nazi Germany in the 1930s and 40s, you would have thought loads of Jewish people and migrants and everything were like, okay, we're leaving the country. Like, we can tell that this is becoming more and more racist. We need to get the hell out of here. They wouldn't come in more and more and more and more if the place was, so awfully racist. So yeah, I find it one of those things that racism exists everywhere, guys, and it's not okay. It exists in Australia. It exists everywhere. But that said, it's not all pervasive in Australia, right? You're not going to walk outside your house in most places and be just racially vilified and shamed or all that sort of stuff. So it is definitely overblown, like the whole going outside and eaten by a crocodile or a shark or whatever. Totally, it can happen, but by and large, when you go outside and look around, there's birds chirping, the sun's up in the sky, cars are driving by, the day is just going on, okay? All right, should we do one more? There's that we're all white. Exactly. Oh, man, exactly. Okay. I think that's it. Oh, that we all love sport. That's another one. Yeah. I always feel bad. I always wish that I liked sport more because my dad is massively into sport. He could watch sport 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Doesn't matter what it is. Just put it on the TV and he'll be a happy man. Give him a beer, leave him alone, and he'll be happy, right? Maybe give him one of his mates who likes sport as well to chat to. I've always felt sort of guilty about the fact that I kind of take it or leave it when it comes to sport in terms of watching it. I always loved participating in it. Like, I love doing it. I love playing the sport. I love the physical activity, but I was never someone who was like, I just sit in front of the TV, living and breathing sport and my teams, and I am, so obsessed with my specific teams and F everyone else who doesn't go for my teams. We're going to dominate you, suffer in your jocks if you lose, and oh my God, it's the end of the world if we lose. I've never been like that. It always blew my mind. Again, this is one of those things that is culturally different between me and my wife and Brazil and Australia. Well, Brazil and me, maybe. Brazilians seem to be absolutely psychotic when it comes to football, right? Soccer, football. And it's almost on the level with Brits, right? The Brits are the same. And it's one of those interesting things where British people and, the migrant community in Australia when they first came here, right? The colonists were largely the same group of people, right? There were loads and loads of Caucasian European migrants who came to Australia at that time. But it's interesting that in Great Britain, people are psychotically passionate about football, soccer, compared to Australia, where we could care less about soccer. But we are a little more psychotic about AFL and cricket and rugby. But even then, you don't hear about the same kind of brawls breaking out, people fighting each other, killing each other in the street. There having to be segregation in the stadiums because, God forbid, two opposing team supporters sit next to one another because they'll bash each other to death. It's so weird when you hear about the hooligan aspect of British support of football, and then here you're just like, you can sit next to anyone, we don't care, it's sport, it's okay, at the end of the day we're all friends. And I remember when I was learning jiu-jitsu, I had a coach called Tiago. And it was really funny. I remember asking him, like, who do you go for in the football, And he's from Sao Paulo, so obviously he went for the team, Sao Paulo. I think it was black and white stripes. And he was like, look, I'm just going to tell you now. And he said it with a Brazilian accent. He didn't say it with an Australian accent. But he said, you can say whatever you want about my wife, my children, my mother, but if you ever say anything about my soccer team, I'll kill you. And he said it with a smile on his face, but I think he was trying to make the point of like, just, how obsessed he is. And again, it's probably not all Brazilians, but my wife kind of has that flair in her sometimes too that comes out and you're just like, ooh, okay, didn't know that was in there. But how obsessed he was with his team. And it was just really funny. He's like, you can say whatever you want about my mum, my wife, my kids, about I do not care, but if you insult my team, I'll kill you. Anyway, so yeah, hopefully this has been entertaining. Probably not enlightful. What am I thinking of? Enlightening. Gosh, I think I need to have a break. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed this episode, guys. Don't forget, there will not be a transcript for these Pete's 2 cents kind of episodes. They're just me kind of ranting and having a bit of fun with you guys. And hopefully it's an excuse for you to just work on your listening comprehension and not worry about reading a transcript whilst studying. It shouldn't be that intense. This should be a bit more enjoyable. But that said, if you want access to the 1,200 or so other episodes and transcripts, bonus episodes, the premium podcast player so that you can listen and read at the same time. If you want access to all of that, go and check out the premium podcast membership at aussieenglish.com.au/podcast. And you can check out my courses and my free ebooks and all that other stuff as well on the website at aussieenglish.com.au. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. I'd love to know what you guys think of Australian stereotypes as well. Are there loads that you've heard of? Are there ones that are true that you've experienced firsthand? Or are there ones that are complete bullshit? You got here and you're like, where are the crocodiles? Where are they? And they're nowhere. Anyway, thanks for joining me. See you later.